couple of minutes. Hello, welcome. Just to let folks know, we did start recording the webinar. We're about to start in a couple minutes. We do record the webinars, for folks to refer to later for educational purposes as well. But yeah, we'll just get started in 2 minutes. I guess so, yeah, if folks are good with it, we can go ahead and get started. Maybe to also, as folks come in, we can kind of re-explain some of the logistics about the meeting too. But welcome, my name is Nadia. Welcome to our monthly War on Youth meeting. Before we get started, just a couple logistical things. Like I said, I think it would be good, maybe as folks join, for us to explain again. We've been experiencing just basically some trolling and bombing on our social media bombing today, and so we decided to keep the chat and also folks might just because we have been doing that before. That's we just on our social media. We want to just go ahead and do that for today. However, that we still want to hear from folks, so please, if you do want to put something in the chat, message one of us, one of the hosts, and we'll definitely get that in there. Or if you want to speak, you could put your hand up button, and definitely because we have generally been trying to keep our chat open lately because we want to hear from folks. It's meant to be that way, but yeah, I just wanted to share that. And again, the meeting is being recorded for to be able to refer to it later for educational purposes as well. So that's basically about it. And for today, we will be looking at the connection of the Department of Child and Family Services, DCFS, to some of the programs which I'm going to explain. We're going to be speaking with folks from the Trans-Latina Coalition as well, and just also having a conversation about what does abolition in the classroom look like, in light of the Uvalde shooting, and just overall, right? And so how do we work towards abolition within the classroom in schools? So that's basically just to look at what we'll be doing today, and just as a sort of really quick snapshot of what we mean by the war on youth. It's really looking at the transition of young people, of youth, of Black and brown and indigenous and immigrant Muslim youth being targeted as and being criminalized as potential violent extremists. Now, we know the gang narrative has been used for several decades now, and of course is still being used. Along with that, what we've seen is also a shift into the terrorism narrative, the violent extremism narrative being used as well. Locally here in LA, we are fighting the TVTP program as well, which is a targeted violence and terrorism prevention program. And essentially, that encompasses different policies and programs. So one is a CVE, which is countering violent extremism, and within that is PVE, preventing violent extremism, which is specifically what targets youth, young people, and names behaviors such as being too angry or frustrated, right? Being isolated, being too much into your culture, being in poverty, being a migrant, as all of these, potential indicators that a young person is on a pathway to becoming radical, on a pathway to extremism or terrorism, right? And especially now with just the increase of mass shootings and school shootings, and of course, white supremacist violence, which has always been there, but definitely we've seen an increase. This narrative now the government and state is using to target what they're calling white extremism, which of course is very much hypocritical, knowing the state itself is white supremacist. However, this is sort of their entry point into targeting communities of color, communities. And so in building the fight against that, which is a national and international fight, of course, we're here in LA as well. So that's just a super quick snapshot of some of the programs. And we'll be going a little more into that. And please feel free, as we're talking, if you have questions, if we're going too fast, if you have a thought, again, please message us on the chat, put your hand up button, and we'll be happy to unmute you. Yeah. So I'll pause there and see if anyone has anything to add to my quick overview or any questions before we pass it off to Okay, cool. And yeah, and like I said, we'll keep reminding folks about right now the chat and mute button. But again, please feel free to share. I thought I'll go ahead and pass it to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Akhil. I'm part of Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. And yeah, just building on what Nadia said, one thing that we really wanted to talk about today is the system of mandated reporting and all of the ways that that intersects with the state, whether it's with the Child and Family Protective Services or with the police. So both Nadia and I are credentialed teachers, and Nadia is currently working in LA School District. And as a part of getting your credential, basically all teachers and social workers have to, basically agree by law to report youth that they're in contact with for a variety of different indicators of different things. And social workers, hospitals, lots of different places are bound by these mandated reporting laws. And one of the reasons I'm bringing this up is because one thing we've talked about in this war on youth fight is the fact that in the UK, which is where the US actually learned a lot of this style of war on terror policing through the UK's Prevent program, teachers and social workers are mandated reporters for extremism. And they maintain secret databases targeting mostly England's Muslim population. And there have even been cases of people who have faced denaturalization, having their citizenship stripped based on targeting from this Prevent program. And here in the US, we have talked about how that's one of the ways that we see the state trying to advance these programs, these countering violent extremism, targeted violence and terrorism prevention, preventing violent extremism, is basically making them so embedded in law that teachers are mandated to report on youth for these things. But one thing that we wanted to talk about today is that it's not that is some future date in which this mandated reporting system will prey on youth of color, Muslim youth, Black youth, trans youth. That's already happening right now. So we have two amazing guests today who are going to talk about the targeting of families, the targeting of youth, and specifically today, the targeting of trans youth. through the mandated reporting system, through Department of Children and Family Services, and also through legislation, through a variety of different assaults on youth in our communities. So basically, that's one thing that we want to really make clear to people, is that we see the Targeted Violence and Terrorism Prevention Program as a continuation of history, rather than as a specific moment in time that is a unique evil that is building upon an otherwise benign system. So it's a continuation of that targeting. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Ramsha, who has been doing a lot of research with and without the coalition, really looking at the ways that Department of Children and Family Services has not only targeted youth, but is building up its firepower through the use of predictive policing and predictive algorithms. So I'm going to share screen 1 second. And Ramsha, feel free to go for it.
Thanks, Akhil, and thank you for sharing screen and supporting with tech today. I'm really excited to be here and to be back in the space as a speaker and to talk to you all about this report called Abolishing the Surveillance of Families. It was a report created in 2020 on understanding harm, surveillance, and information sharing in the Department of Children and Family Services in Los Angeles County. And again, my name is Ramsha. I use she and they pronouns. Next slide, please. So some context. This report was created in the summer of 2020. And I worked really closely with Hamid in understanding how the Department of Children and Family Services is situated in a larger structure and a larger system of information sharing with many different departments that actively criminalize youth and actively criminalize families through surveilling them. A little bit about me. I was a youth organizer for around 4+ years, and I'm currently working on campaigns at the national level. And right now I'm based in the Midwest. Next slide, please. I also want to note that this work that comes from a lineage of knowledge. So this work would not be what it is without deep gratitude and acknowledgement of Black feminism as a framework to approach thinking and to approach life through as a philosophical approach. But also I want to thank really important thinkers who helped shape this work, like Dr. Dorothy Roberts, who recently published a book called Torn Apart that talks about the tearing apart of Black families through the Department of Children and Family Services and Child Protective Services everywhere, as well as the history of that. I also want to thank people and activists like Aaron Cloud. And of course, I want to thank the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition members, Hamid, Shakir, Mariella, Akhil, Nadia, who helped shape the thinking behind this report and really ask key questions to deepen the analysis that I'm sharing with you today. So although this work may be informed by my own study and ancestral work and positionality within racial capitalism and casteism, I really do want to acknowledge and share deep love and gratitude to those people who helped shape this work. Next slide, please. Before I get really into it, I also want to say that this topic is really heavy, right? Like I'm going to be talking about the separation of Black, Indigenous, and immigrant families. And specifically, I'm going to be talking about violence against children. So I ask that folks in the audience take care of yourselves and others, like unclench your jaw, relax your shoulders. I know I need to relax mine a little bit. Sometimes I have like speaker anxiety, so that's where that comes from too. And take breaks as needed, because this is really heavy conversation. So please take breaks. Next slide, please. So as the coalition says a lot, the Department of Children and Family Services information sharing is not a moment in time. There is a history. And in this history, I'm specifically centering Black and Indigenous experiences as I talk about it, where the criminalization of Black motherhood and the context of 1980s policies like the war on drugs, the defunding of social services, mass incarceration, the womb to foster care pipeline, all of these things have shaped this current political moment we're in as it relates to the Department of Children and Family Services. I also want to name that boarding schools, indigenous boarding schools that removed indigenous children from their homes to assimilate them to whiteness violently, have been around since 1819. And as late as the 1970s, indigenous children comprise 35% of children in foster care. So there are real implications to ways that the history of indigenous assimilation and genocide in this country, as well as enslavement, has shaped our current moment as it relates to the Department of Children and Family Services. And it's all about meeting the white social norms of family instead of protecting children. In a lot of ways, when we think about the structure of family, it's rooted in whiteness, it's rooted in cis heteropatriarchy and settler colonialism. The idea of like a mother and father and two children owning property is so loaded and is really weaponized to protect family and protect the structure of family that this nation is built upon. And all of these different pieces like suburbanization, US imperialism and war, the militarization of local police departments use the rhetoric of protecting the nuclear white family to further themselves in their political agenda. And so I'll get deeper into that as the presentation goes on. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I want to zoom in a little bit specifically on Los Angeles County. So in 2019, over 150,000 children in LA County interacted with the Department of Children and Family Services. And often the families who are even suspected of neglecting their children or abusing their children are surveilled by social workers and police. And social workers and police, if they have any sort of inkling or tip that someone is abusing their child or neglecting them, get unbridled discretion to unannouncedly enter their homes and extract information on them. And we know that Black families and low-income families are especially disproportionately represented in this system. So only 9% of LA County's population is Black as of 2019. But as of 2019, 23.7% of the youth in the DCFS system were Black. And then especially in the context of the pandemic, at the time when this report was created in 2020, there was a report released by UCLA and Dr. Ananya Roy that talked about how over 300,000 evictions were due once eviction moratoriums went away. And I think that this is important to highlight, especially now that we're in a context of people not receiving any sort of support around housing, inflation being where it is. I think it's really important to consider the effects this is having on family separation and the risk of child-parent separation due to lack of housing in our current context, where any sort of pandemic funding support is really out the window at the moment. I also want to name that this is over a $2.3 billion department. So the Department of Children and Family Services has one of the largest budgets as a department in LA County. And it's also a big piece of the nonprofit industrial complex in LA County. So these top 9 nonprofits that grossed the most amount of money in LA County in 2019 made over $169 million as it relates to foster care, adoption, and any sort of like child family services that they give to people under the guise of like child welfare. And so there's a lot of money poured into the system, and the report itself goes more deeply into how adoption and foster care largely are also rooted in a capitalist system that is really, really hard to swallow, and thinking about how children are profited off of and bought and sold in a lot of ways in these systems. Next slide, please. So the algorithmic ecology, this is a longtime coalition framework that I think is really useful in thinking about this particular system of information sharing within the Department of Children and Family Services. So we know ideologically, the structure of family is rooted in settler colonialism, white supremacy, patriarchy, capitalism, and that's how it functions ideologically. But institutionally, what that means is that police and schools and all these other things cater to this understanding of family. Operationally, it means that data and algorithms. It means that child welfare and the Department of Children and Family Services operate to maintain this idea of family that is really loaded by white supremacy and patriarchy and all these other ideologies listed here. And then community-wise, it really lends itself to surveillance, and it lends itself to displacement, digital redlining, and incarceration. And I like this framework a lot because I think it's useful in thinking about how the Department of Children and Family Services is an institution, but it's connected to all these other pieces, and how it functions in our communities. Next slide, please. So predictive analytics and child welfare. I think sometimes when we talk about surveillance, at least in some of the circles I'm in at the national level, we can often think about databases as just these passive forms of information gathering, and are just analog surveillance. It's not doing much. But I really want to make the case that databases are just as insidious as any other form of surveillance. And that's because databases are not forms of passive information gathering. Databases interlink criminal history, public welfare benefits, interactions with Department of Children and Family Services in one place. And when you inherently link all of that data in one place, you're criminalizing families before any suspected neglect or abuse even happens. You're creating a digital footprint for them before they've done anything wrong. And the next slide will show that. But first, I want to talk about specifically the algorithm that the Department of Children and Family Services in Los Angeles uses. So I've been talking real fast, so I'm gonna slow down a little bit. The Department of Children and Family Services uses this tool called the Standard Decision-Making Tool. And what that does is it criminalizes poverty through vague definitions of neglect, like consistent hunger, broken windows in the home, having an underweight child. And we know neglect is the most common reason why DCFS is called. So for those, also for people who are not familiar with what an algorithm is sort of this idea it's a like computer tool where you take a bunch of inputs and you put them into the algorithm, it'll give you an answer in its output. So if a DCFS social worker sees that there's consistent hunger or an underweight child, they'll input that into the algorithm, and the algorithm will tell the social worker whether or not there should be intervention or family separation. And what that leads to is an algorithm or a computer that is created by random white professors at USC, deciding whether or not a child should be separated from their family. And it means that the social worker would have to work really hard to actually counteract what the decision-making tool says. So they would have to go through their manager, they would have to go through many other people in order to override what the standard decision-making tool tells them. And ultimately what it means is that folks are relying on algorithms to make decisions, these decisions that impact people in our communities, and not training social workers to be adequately equipped to respond to child welfare and adequately respond to the symptoms of neglect that they have named that are really just people being low income and needing more economic support in this structure that we live in. Next slide, please. So this is the information sharing environment of the Department of Children and Family Services. So here you'll see so many acronyms, and on the left side, on the right side, you'll see the acronyms key of all the different departments and institutions that actually share information. So when a person, like a social worker, does a report on a child, that immediately gets, if you look at the LA agencies piece, if a person does a report on a child, it'll be shared with all these different databases that are connected to so many different federal and local agencies. We also know that nonprofits and academics share information too, and are implicit in this entire information sharing environment. We know private entities like foundations and social media, and even Amazon is implicated in this because they passively, or not passively, they hoard all of their data and they sell it through Amazon Web Services and cloud storage. I'm going to give folks just like a minute to like look at this too, because I know that this image can be really overwhelming when we think about how many different places a report on neglect or abuse can be seen and where it goes. So feel free to take like a few seconds to look at this too. Okay. Are there any questions on this piece so far? I see one hand raised.
Hamid, would you be able to unmute them to ask their questions?
Hi, thank you for your presentation. Awesome work. How reliable, what method was used to obtain this complex graph? It looks awesome. I'm just wondering how reliable it is, basically.
So this graph was created by tracing different reports that the Department of Children and Family Services puts out. So for instance, they'll share like where they store their data, and it's on Amazon Web Services. In addition to that, it's about like really talking to people, like talking to social workers directly and asking them, what databases are you inputting your information and your cases on? And then also asking them who else has access to it. So for instance, FCI, like the Family and Children Index, like I learned through speaking to DCFS social workers directly, as well as searching Family and Children Index, who has access to it and how many different places it can go. Yeah, and also I think talking to people who are directly impacted as well, along who potentially could approach them about a case. So for instance, one person I spoke to who was directly impacted and had their family separated talked about how ICE had access to all of their family separation data as it relates to social workers coming in to talk to them. And so a lot of it comes from speaking also to PhD students at UCLA who centered their dissertation on this, and other people as well. I hope that helps answer your question. I saw another hand raised, or two other hand raised.
Hi, yes. Thank you for this presentation. I have a question about the previous slide before this one. The standard decision-making tool. I guess this is just a random question as to when they started using this tool, maybe like how long it's been. I'm just wondering. If you don't have that, it's okay. I could probably actually maybe, yeah. I was just wondering.
It's actually, I know it's relatively recent. It's within the last 10 years. I can link the PDF to the report that was written in 2020 about that too, because that probably details when it was created. It was created by professors at USC, but I will link it to be sure. And then we have one more question.
Yeah, hi. Hey folks, my name is Matios. I use he, him pronouns. And thank you so much, Ramsha. This is an incredible presentation. Regarding the information sharing environment, I think on the next slide, I know you talked about how the nonprofit industrial complex was kind of vast within the Department of Child and Family Services inner workings. And I saw that First 5 LA was named in there. I was wondering if you could maybe talk about who they are, what they do. And I was really intrigued by their connection to what I think says the Interagency Council on Child Abuse and Neglect. Yeah.
Yeah, so the First 5 LA actually worked with the USC Children's Data Network to give the USC Children's Data Network data on and informed their entire creation of the standard decision-making tool. And that relates to the agency network that you talked about, because that agency is actually really hard that network is really hard to get information on in my research, but I included them because they work really closely with First 5 LA and helped shape the standard decision-making tool, and specifically talked about the standard decision-making tool as it relates to youth who had been incarcerated. So that's why it's under the incarceration section. Thank you for that question. And thank you all for these questions. Okay, I think we can move to the next slide. So in my conversations with social workers, I found the dissonance in what they felt within their own work. A lot of these social workers were like college educated, BA or master's degree in social work, women of color actually that I spoke to. And I asked them a slew of questions, but the one that I think showed the most dissonance for themselves in their work was, do you think the standard decision-making tool is unbiased? And they said things like, children of color get removed the most, particularly our young boys, because there's bias around what the behavior represents. There's not an understanding of what trauma looks like in our community and how our families and children are impacted by trauma. Another person said, poverty doesn't equal abuse. However, these communities have more interaction with law enforcement. And as a society, we need to work on how we view poverty and the rights parents have to their children. Whew, like that in and of itself is really wild to me. This idea that parents own their children or have rights over, like own their children in that way. So that's loaded in its own way, but the last quote, DCFS is just trying to make it, the standards decision-making tool, work for everyone, and it doesn't. It just can't. I don't think you can make the tool they gave us a general thing. And so much is still in the social worker's discretion if we use it. I think these quotes are really illustrative of how the standard decision-making tool takes things as complicated as family relationships, as abuse, as neglect, and tries to quantify them and make them formulaic and use computer technology to decide whether or not a child stays with their family. Like these things are so complicated. And ultimately, like there needs to be more healing responses to how we respond to young people, especially when they're in situations of neglect, especially when they're in situations of abuse, and how we as in our communities can need to create structures where young people are held, where if the relationship with the parent is fraught, like who are other safe adults they can go to? Who are other safe people they can go to? Because ultimately we know that when the state interferes, they move to separation so quickly. And even these social workers feel the dissonance of how like a computer tool, an algorithm cannot understand what trauma looks like in our community. So I think these quotes are really powerful in that way. Next slide, please. That was the last slide. So thank you all so much. I know we just had space for questions, but I do want to have a little bit more space if there are any other lingering questions that folks have.
And Ramsha brought some great discussion questions too, in case people don't have questions. I have one to start it off, if that's okay, Ramsha. So I was wondering if you could talk in your research about, well, from your research about the effect of even just starting the investigation on a family, like the effects of the gaze upon a family as being dysfunctional, even if it ends up being not proven, but like not going further than an investigation, and maybe both sort of the emotional or traumatic effects of that, but also literally like what happens to that information. Like when somebody starts a report on a family, and if it doesn't end up somewhere immediate, does that open up that family or that youth or those parents to other kinds of targeting materially? So emotionally and materially, what does that do?
Definitely. Thanks, Akil, for that question. I think I want to also, I can speak to the materially piece, but I also would love if there's anyone here who has been directly impacted and is generous and willing to share their story of if they've experienced anything related to Department of Children and Family Services, that they can also share emotionally what that was like, because I personally don't think I'm the right person to take up space in that way. But what I will say is that materially, a lot of social workers actually use the CARES database, which is in that information sharing environment map that I shared with you. And that database connected to all the other ones is what shares it with LAPD, what shares it with Immigration Customs Enforcement. And that's if they create any sort of report on a young person. So it can be just like a home visit or something like that. Or it could be as drastic as family separation. Where people's information and their digital footprint is already created, and it's shared, and it intersects with also if people are receiving public welfare benefits, so people who receive WIC. There's databases in that information sharing environment I created where people who receive WIC or EBT, their information is interlinked with if they've had an interaction with DCFS, or if they've been incarcerated, if they have any sort of criminal history. Things like fines and fees from like parking tickets might even be on there, is already creating a digital footprint of people. And it constantly is targeting low-income people, Black and brown people especially. I know we have two other questions. Nee, I think you were first.
Yeah, thanks, Ramsha. Yeah, I guess my question is specific to the standard SDM. But I was wondering if you could kind of just explain a little bit about just because like even in Operation Laser and in some of the policing programs, the similar like algorithms are utilized to be able to like tell like to predict right who are the chronic offenders. Of course, in the eyes of the state or the police state. But I guess I'm just wondering. For that, like is it like you get points, and then the more points you kind of get, like whether it's through different data entry, so if a neighbor calls the cop, if the neighbor calls the cops on someone, or if in school it's kind of noted, is it like the more times it appears, the more points that they get, and then more attention is kind of focused on them? Or is it like if it touches 3 points, or like poverty, or being what is it, underweight, is it like it automatically gets like addressed or kind of sent to a social worker?
Yeah, so the standard decision-making tool is used by social workers when they do home checks. So if they're coming to someone's house and they notice like exposed wire in the home, that adds a point. If they notice broken windows in the house, if the child doesn't have a bed to sleep on, these things that are really more indicative of a family being poor and not about child safety necessarily, are used and inputted into that standard decision-making tool. And then the algorithm says yes or no on whether that child needs to be separated from the family. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, of course. And then we have another hand raised.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I just want to go back to you made a point in your presentation about just the importance for our community to create safe spaces for young people and for youth. And yeah, I'm like, I guess I honestly, before coming today, I didn't really know what was going to be discussed today. And even throughout the presentation, I didn't really realize, like, until you like brought up, like, are there any people here that are directly impacted by like having gone through the Department of Children and Family Services, that I'm like, oh, wait a minute, like I have. And then I'm just like remembering like all the things that were like so not helpful. And oh my God, and all the things that were helpful. And like, we say it all the time, like all the things that youth need. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And just, I remember like, just so much shame that is brought on parents from like literally being poor, or like language barriers, immigration status, education level, so many things. And yeah, so much shame and fault that's put on the parents. And just how punitive the responses are in punishing parents instead of focusing on how to support the children and the youth in the household, and also the parents, of course. Yeah, and I'm just like, all the things that they did, like none of them were beneficial to the children in the household, and were, yeah, just very punitive and punishing our parents, and just also a lot of yeah, I'm just like, you know, things that, but there were some things that were helpful, like providing like therapy and group therapy, and like children's activities, like literally things that children need. But yeah, and like how scary and traumatizing it was, like having social workers come to your house and interrogate you, and like the fear of your parents being deported because they're undocumented, and like the fear of like the social worker getting your parents deported. And so not only are you living with the constant fear of your parent, like losing your parents due to like separation, deportation, but you're also living with the fear of having you being separated from your parents because of these social workers coming into your house, and like it being so violent. Like they probably see it as like just like a little interview or like snooping around in your house, but how invasive and how fucked up that is. Like I didn't really realize this until like right now I'm coming to these realizations, like as I'm speaking, and just like remembering like, yeah, how traumatic those experiences were. But yeah, I guess thanks for working on this report, and yeah, I hope that, yeah, I guess that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think there's a lot of shaming of parents, shaming of families, and so much violence and invasiveness and intrusion that that DCFS does to surveil families. And it means a lot to hear you share what your experience was like. So thank you. Nadia, I see your hand raised.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much to you who just shared. And I think something you said really kind of made me sort of reiterate what I feel like, because I'm a teacher, right? And so, you know, you made the comment about how to them, they see it as like an interview, which is, oh, it's just a little interview. I think similarly, as teachers, you know, sometimes I'll hear like certain colleagues, like I don't want to call them colleagues, but people I work with, I guess, but they're there. You know, just, yeah, like taking things very lightly, like call like that, whether it's a call home or a call, you know, to the admin, or a call to even to DCFS. And of course, yes, you know, like you said, there are things that can come out of certain things like therapy or whatever, but yeah, it's always something that's really bothered me on how lightly I see educators take those contacts, like making that initial contact. You know, so that was just something quickly I wanted to lift. And you know, I know later we're going to talk about like what abolition looks like in setting in education. But yeah, I think just as the social workers, like that, you know, interview is so it really can mean so much for a family, and really can lead to separation. And so I think similarly as counselors or as educators, like how serious are we taking those, quote, little calls or little things we're reporting. So yeah, I just really wanted to appreciate and honor it.
Thank you, Nadia. Yeah. When I worked at like a youth nonprofit, this idea of mandated reporting used to come up too. And it should never be taken lightly, right? And I do think there's ways. I was lucky enough to work in a place where it was never taken lightly, but there was also ways that one can respond to abuse in a home that doesn't resort to calling the police state on a family, and different ways of intervening without interacting with the police state. Akil, I see your hand raised, and then Matios after that.
So Matios, why don't you go first? I've talked a good amount.
Oh, thanks, Akil. Even though I feel like I've asked a question already. Yeah, I wanted to say thank you to the prior speaker for sharing that. And one thing that kind of struck me that they said was that, some of the services, and this was my interpretation, please correct me if I'm wrong, but some of the services that DCFS may have provided were helpful. And I know we're talking about mandated reporting as a point of contact or like addressing violence in the home, but I'm wondering if in your research, Rumsha, if you've encountered folks that straight up just wanted help or resources that were maybe then criminalized as a result of reaching out to DCFS, and what that looks like.
Yeah, that's a really good point, that a lot of these people really do just want help and resources. And I think there are people who are teachers or nurses who may not have this analysis around how the Department of Children and Family Services is interconnected with policing and surveillance, who may, without thinking, think like, oh, I'm helping these people by connecting them to resources. So in my research, what I did notice is that people who were seeking resources, I think it's a really complicated question, because the Department of Mental Health and any sort of like therapy resources that are public and free oftentimes do criminalize our communities, do criminalize Black and Brown youth, Muslim youth, Indigenous youth. I think a lot about different organizations that have talked about that and have a lot of work that they've done around that, like Vigilant Love, who talked about the surveillance of the Muslim community and through mental health. And so I think your question is really complicated, because I think that when people reach out for support through public services, they're already criminalized. If there's any sort of thing they say that could denote extremism in the context we live in, they could be reported for that. And so it's really hard, I think, for our communities to receive resources and not be criminalized in any way. Does anyone else want to add to answer Matios's question? Yeah, please go ahead, Nee.
Yeah, and just yeah, thanks everyone for sharing. And I think like in my personal experience, like where like in households, right, where there are like intersecting, like yeah, when there are intersecting things at play, like for example when there's domestic violence. I know that like growing up, that's something that like I know that my like initially my like not having the resources, and my mother really not knowing many folks in the community or in many neighbors, like having to resort to like thinking that the cops are the only solution to getting that support, and then how that leads to like you having to go and do interviews, you having to kind of respond to that criminalization. And so just echoing in what folks are saying, especially when you add that layer of like of mixed status families and like folks that are experiencing that are also undocumented, how a lot of folks end up walking it back, not because they don't need those resources, but because it's going to lead to the criminalization, the deportation, and the like not really addressing what folks really need, which isn't to like it isn't punitive and carceral options, but it's things that actually support folks in communities. So things like therapy, having spaces where you're able to talk about that and are able to do that without like fear of like it leading to like fatal or like larger consequences. And so I often think about that in just our responses of like even the privileges of sometimes like having or thinking that like even policing is an option, because so many of us can't, because it's going to lead to many consequences that we can't really that we won't be able to get out of, or it's hard to get out of. And so yeah, I think in just like my own personal experience, I know that that's something that like that those things are needed, but through those punitive measures, it's always it does leave room for more violence, because violence is happening every day. And then when you don't have a space where like you're able to have it in community, and you're able to have it without fear of retribution from the state, which they do every day. It ends up becoming hard, because it's an armed social work. It is armed social work. It is punitive. So I don't know, just those are just some of my thoughts.
Thank you. Taylor, please feel free to go ahead.
Thank you so much for the presentation. It was incredible, and thanks everyone for sharing. I have a question for you, and I guess for everyone. I'm curious if in the course of your like research and thinking and feeling about all these questions, have there been alternatives to social work, alternative ways of addressing harm within the like family structure that you found to be, I guess, more like liberatory than the current like punitive and carceral forms that we've been talking about?
Yeah, that's a great question. So page 13 of the report that I wrote actually talks about alternatives and imagining alternatives to the child welfare state. But that specific piece, when I wrote it, was 2 years ago. And I think since then, I've been thinking, and in preparation for this conversation, I was thinking a lot about how queering family structure has been an ancestral practice. In preparation for this conversation, I thought a lot about my grandparents and how during the partition of India and Pakistan, they would claim like Hindu people, random people as family to protect them from soldiers, and say that, no, they're one of us, like they're Muslim, they're fine, it's okay. And vice versa, that happened during partition, where I think the claiming of someone as your kin when they're not your kin, and the queering of family structure has always been a form of resistance for so many different communities and in different places. And I think that's a piece that I think is still very alive and well now, and how we queer our family structure. But I also think in general in life, there needs to be more regenerative responses to harm. So as someone who did a lot of like restorative justice work with youth and transformative justice work, there needs to be things like free and immediate care for people when they need counseling, when they need support. There needs to be prevention of abuse and neglect through educating parents. A lot of people need support as parents. And we, as a society, we often punish parents and blame them for the ways that our society and way structures of oppression constantly put the onus on them to handle things. When we know that young people are like reared and grow in community and grow when they have many different adults and many different safe places to be in. I also think it requires reparations. Like, I think there needs to be reparations of the harm of forced family separation of indigenous communities and Black American communities in this country. And without responding to those histories, we're not adequately addressing the root of where the Department of Children and Family Services come from. Yeah, but sorry, I saw there was a message in the chat, so I got distracted, but I'll stop there for now. Thank you so much. Thank you all so much. I see Hamid raise their hand now too.
Sorry for the last minute. I'll be real brief. I think what's as we are speaking about it, and I'm glad that Nina brought up the issue of armed social workers, that we're going to see a massive expansion of policing of our bodies under the guise of community policing. because that's where really this, and we get caught up and almost like, and within the nonprofit industrial complex about this language of guardian policing, right? So what does that mean? That how can a cop be your guardian? But that's how it is, and it's very much driven, by this whole notion of public safety, and increasingly, and this goes back to the legacy of Bill Bratton, who had said that about 15, 20 years ago, that the main prize for them was to really dip into health and human services dollars. And in order for them to dip into health and human services dollars, they had to kind of rebrand themselves into this whole language of being what we are talking about. But it's also very much a mode of occupation. But I think we have to really keep an eye out. And of course, the coalition has been doing a lot of work kind of exposing this facade and the sham of community policing. But that's very much moving to the extent that now in Los Angeles, LAPD even opened up its own new bureau, which is called Community Safety Partnership Bureau. So anyways, just wanted to put that out there as an additional layer in our fight to keep an eye out for these structural developments.
Hey, could I ask the next question? I don't see another hand.
Yeah, that sounds great.
I have two questions. One is, do you think you could talk, since the theme of today, about the particular ways that you've seen this impacting trans youth, whether in LA or maybe like the razor's edge would be in other states where they're trying to legislate that parents have to be notified, or not parents, that the child protective services have to be notified for things such as the youth being on hormone therapy or other things like that. And then my second question is, could you talk a little bit about the predictive aspect of this and how you see that potentially changing or expanding or exacerbating the harm? I wonder if it was at one point pitched as a reform itself from the sort of like the specter of the racist white social worker, which, I mean, I don't know how many people even acknowledge that reality. The idea that a machine could be more objective, although it's the same thing as we've seen with any other, with Predpoll or whatever, which is, it's the very question, it's the very like looking at this family and saying should it be separated, and what right does the state or law enforcement have to do that? But anyway, more mechanistically, how do you see the predictive analytics like change? Like how do you see that evolving? What's going on? So those two questions, yeah, how is it affecting trans youth? And if you could go more into detail about the predictive policing part of it.
Thanks, Akhil. Yeah, I think, this conversation came up really recently for me as it related to those bills that are being passed in Texas and in a lot of other states around criminalizing parents for allowing their youth to access gender affirming care. And I think it goes back to this structure of family being this white supremacist, patriarchal, capitalist structure of idealism, and how, in particular, when white youth who are of a certain class status and their parents are being criminalized for receiving gender affirming care, is when people are now looking at Department of Children and Family Services and child protective services everywhere as being a problem. So in popular culture and in the mainstream, we're seeing people talk more about how child protective services is fucked up and how child welfare in this country is fucked up, because it's affecting a new class of people right now. And it's affecting a class of like white families who already fit the structure, but perhaps they have a trans youth who needs gender affirming care and they're afraid of being criminalized for it. So now we're seeing people care more about it, but we know that it's not a moment in time, that this is rooted in so many other structures historically in this country, and that child welfare as a whole needs to be abolished. And we need to create new structures of care for young people as we're abolishing it. And then as it relates to your second question, and I would love also if anyone else wants to build upon Akhil's question around gender affirming of care and criminalizing trans youth. But in terms of your second question, as it relates to predictive social work and predictive analytics as it relates to this work, I think that question is really complicated. I think a lot about how we see algorithms being tested on this new generation of people, of young people right now. I think about the ways that young people are surveilled now in a way that is so unique than the rest of us were when we were young people. So for instance, through like social media algorithms, through educational learning programs that track them, and through educational and instructional design as an entire industry that is just used to surveil and track young people and steal their data in education. Through standardized testing even, like I see how young people and predictive analytics, algorithms, and the buying and selling of their data has been a through line in this like younger Gen Z and younger generation. And I think it is a unique experience, and I think we will see it in other aspects of youth's lives. Yeah, I would love to hear what you think, Akhil, too. Not to turn the question back to you, but I do know you have thoughts on this. And so I would love to hear what you think as well on both of your questions, or either one.
Well, for the second one, when you were talking about this, the vision I got in my head is it reminded me of drone strikes, because there's something about the cold efficiency and the way that something could seem almost not real to a person crunching numbers on a computer, and then it just rips apart a family on the other end. And it feels like the way that drone strikes were like this reform on ground invasion sort of warfare, where people had to sort of physically face the reality of what they were doing. Now it just feels like they sit behind a computer and then it just happens. And I think that similarly, like that kind of thing, what it does is it allows for huge expansion, and like just to like expand, to like target people on like this huge level. The other thing it makes me feel like is this is it's like part of war. It's like a part of a war, like a war on these communities. Because I don't mean this in like a conservative kind of like way, but strong families, whatever they look like, are like better able to resist, the state, and like tearing them apart. And is something that I think colonial powers have always done to like populations they're conquering. So it just feels like it's like them getting new weapons of war. I don't really know that much about the first one, but I know that right now a federal judge has temporarily stopped the governor's orders in Texas to direct teachers and social workers and hospitals to report families for having trans youth. I think it's really interesting the way you said that people are caring about this now because it affects white trans youth, when it was affecting youth of color before and it was seen as normal. So that was a good, yeah. By the way, just a couple logistical notes. We do have our meeting tomorrow at 6 p.m. for the War on Youth working group. And if anybody here is interested in coming in that one, we're fighting particularly now against a program that could fold very easily into this matrix. It's called LAPD's PATH program, which will weaponize. It will create a team of 500 teachers and social workers and other people to report on youth for extremism, and then basically send that information to LAPD's threat assessment teams. So if you're interested in joining to fight that, yeah, you can message any of the hosts or co-hosts to get the Zoom. And one of the things that we're hoping to do in the rest of the meeting is, so Nadia is a currently working teacher and an abolitionist, and has personally given me extremely wise and kind advice in navigating this system based on her years of experience. And so she's going to help us have a community conversation around ways that we can approach these situations with, how we can create some of those alternatives. What is this? Hamid? Okay. I'm just seeing your comment.
Oh, this time I should have put LOL. I mean, this was, there's been a researcher who was, I think this is a South Asian citizen
Oh, this is one of the bad
creating
ones.
these,
Okay.
just out of New Zealand and then Australia, which has been used quite a bit, and it's devastated families, man. So
I didn't see the message on top, so I thought you were talking about Ramsha.
sorry.
Okay.
No, I would.
Anyway, yeah, so I'm going to pass it to Nadia, unless anybody has any last questions for Ramsha. I just don't want to take up too much of their time. Unfortunately not. Nadia is had to leave.
Cool, thank you. Thank you so much, Ramsha. Yeah, it's good to share space with you again after a minute, and just really appreciate your analysis. And yeah, I think the conversation we just had, I really appreciate it as well. And yeah, I think for this conversation, and and hopefully we will get to have the Trans-Latino Coalition back with us. But one of the things that we did want to have a discussion on is just looking at what can abolition look like in an educational setting. And so that was something we were hoping to discuss, right? And I think that, that's something that really has a place everywhere, meaning for everyone to participate, a teacher, a parent, a student, a counselor, or just care about youth, right? Which I think we all do that here. So yeah, I think that would be the first question is how can we practice abolition in a school setting? And and I think feel free to speak from your own experience or even just ideas, right? We talked about imagining. So it really is that combination of practicing as well as imagining. And yeah, and of course I do have my own thoughts, but I just wanted to just open it up and see. All good. We're a small group, so I feel like we're just opening it on and it's all good.
I think the one thing that Nadia, is it okay if I share with everybody one thing you told me one time? It's just kind of like it's like it's not really a solution, but it's a way to hand a little bit of power back to the youth, which is to tell them as they're talking to you before they reveal something that you would be mandated to report, to remind them that if they say something kind of like this, then you're required by law to report. And that kind of gives them agency about whether or not to say that thing, rather than making them feel kind of like you like trick them or like preying upon them or something like that. I remember that was one piece of advice that you gave me, which I really wish more teachers heard that advice and practiced it. I don't know if that's abolitionist or if it's just trying to be a decent person within a fucked up system,
If I can quickly respond to that, yeah, and I think, and with that, even when I do tell students that, I tell them I wish it wasn't like that. I named that. And so that way they know, okay, I'm not just okay, I'm ready to report if I have to, but it's more unfortunately I have to, right? So I think that's kind of something I also add to that. but yeah, I don't know what folks think about that. I think it's both, but yeah, I think it is abolitionist and it's just about the system, which I guess, yeah, they're not necessarily mutually exclusive, right? I don't know what folks think about what I feel shared or any other thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think just in like in reflecting on like yeah, even in my own like growing up and like in my own school setting, I think what was helpful and what I've seen folks like practice and oftentimes it's folks that like well, I mean a lot of the teachers that I had came from the same neighborhoods, oftentimes in the same school setting or had graduated from the same school. So I think definitely I think one also like being able to like normalize like situations, especially things like poverty, especially things that already like that happen in households and that are the reality of like the population of the students. I think like it definitely is helpful to like be able to like normalize conversations that are really like that are like traumatic, like poverty, like domestic violence, like all these things that folks often like that we face every day or that we face growing up, and connecting folks to resources as well, but being able to kind of like as a especially as an adult or as someone that's teaching and that's with well with youth, being able to also like not think of it as like your like Paulo Freire also talks about like not banking or not like thinking as children as someone that you have to teach or you have to like insert this knowledge to, but rather as like breaking that mold into to like recognizing and also respecting the autonomy of youth, because that's so often, especially in a patriarchal society. And I really appreciate like the bell hooks and all about love, where they talk about like adult supremacy and they talk about how like in a patriarchal society children are an extension of what they say of mothers, but birth givers specifically, and how like children really aren't considered folks that like are intelligible, that can make their own decisions, that should be given this information. But I think we would do a disservice if we treat youth like that. Because regardless of like how old we are, I think we all contribute and we all have our own lived experience that we bring into whatever space we come into. So being able to like have those conversations with folks, and that's why I really appreciate Kyo, what you kind of Kyo and Nadia, like even having those conversations of like this is what like not the expectation, but this is like also my reality, knowing that you're kind of navigating through those systems. So being as open as possible and letting folks know what's up, because like you can't really be an autonomous, or you can't really have autonomy if you don't really know what's up, or you can't really make those informed decisions, or even to know who you trust. And you can trust one teacher, but then that might look different for like the next class. So I think being able to like speak about that and like yeah, be real about like what that looks like. You know, I'm not sure if anyone else is having issues, but I'm kind of having a little difficulty hearing.
Yeah, I can't hear Nadia at all.
I could hear you a little bit more that second time, Nadia.
Maybe it's a little louder than it is. Yeah, because it would be need regarding the curriculum element, just like about the But yeah, I wanted to also talk to and propose, I know and not for anybody on the spot that you haven't spoken about. I'm just open it up. No, here's no page. No. Luckily, you can hear me ask that. Okay. Is that better?
Much better. Thank you.
Okay. I think it's because I took one of my headphones out. Sorry about that.
What were you saying before, Nadia? Sorry. Sorry to
Oh,
make you repeat
I
it.
can repeat it. Yeah, I'm sorry. No, I was connecting to what Nee said about it kind of made me think of like how working towards abolition through the curriculum and just debunking the banking method and what does it mean to actually value perspectives, value experiences, and just and not get stuck on kind of the expected curriculum. Of course, understanding and this is what sucks, when I see like English and math teachers, there's so much testing they have to do. So even I think for teachers who want to push against the curriculum but they're teaching English and math, I think it's a little more difficult. Whereas like being a history teacher, I don't have like the same standardized testing that the English and math teachers have to deal with, right? So I feel like different subjects have a little more leeway. But then those subjects that do, I think even more reason to really push against, sort of what the standard curriculum is. And even just the approach, recently I had some students deal with one of the administration and they were literally saying, well, why can't they were planning an event and everything, why can't we do it on this date? And the assistant principal said, well, because I said so. Like, what? I think those even approaches. And it was really cool after that because we had a meeting with her and, supposed to be with her, she didn't even come, but that was besides the point, but with the principal and a couple of these students that really just got to voice and say, if I would have, one of the students said this, she said, if I would have come at an adult like that, at the principal or assistant principal, they would have seen me as disrespectful. But for her to do it, it wasn't. And so I think, just how are young people and youth being seen and treated and just basically talked to. Acting like the parent of a toddler. Yeah, exactly. And even, right, and even I think there's ways to how we teach toddlers agency, obviously knowing that like there's still so much basic just living they're still learning, but like, right, like just learning like what I need this or no, yes, things like that. But yeah. Maybe we can go to the next question too, about which we kind of have talked about navigating, teach them young. Yes, I completely agree. Teaching them young, pushing against adult supremacy, right? Okay, maybe we can go to this next one of how do we navigate work settings that force mandated reporting? How do we navigate work settings with mandated reporting?
I feel like this is part of a larger question around that I have personally about, the ethical complications of just entering the school system in general. Because on the one hand, it's like where the masses are, it's where kids are. You could have your own little tiny experiment. You could do you could do a Saturday school that, you start with your community, or you could I know, like, you know, Dindi, who is from Are, has like, they run a private school that's like sliding scale admission, but like really founded on all these principles, including Freire's education system and stuff. But at the end of the day, those will be like very small experiments, and what really needs to happen is like the entire system needs to be abolished and replaced with one that is like, you know, truly built to serve the needs of people. And like, I don't know yet. I don't know whether or not it's better to like, I mean, because I do feel maybe I'm just trying to like maybe I'm trying to reassure myself in a way that's not true, but that there's some difference between like a teacher and like a, you know, like a warden or something like that, you know, in that like a teacher is a, you know, ideally a care worker, and that there you can do some good in that position. I don't know if that's just me trying to soothe my own conscience, but is it better to like enter the system and try to be one of the ones that gives youth like a caring presence temporarily, you know, like one section of their day? Because I feel like that's what they're getting with Nadia, you know? Or is it better to not enter that system and not be part of the, you know, kind of like the army of the state that's, you know, like being weaponized against the youth? I don't know. Sorry, that was rambling.
Hey, Nadia, you're muted.
Or it's doing the headphone thing again. I think if you turn off
Oh,
Bluetooth.
sorry about that. Yeah. Yeah, no, I was saying if anyone kind of has a response to what you just shared, Akil, I do have some thoughts about it too, but yeah, I just want to see if anyone else does.
So it's like Hamid does.
Yeah, go for it.
No, not to that thing. I'm sorry. I'm just my thoughts was kind of slow. I wanted to go back, but maybe Nadia, if you want to respond to that, I can come back to the previous thing later.
Yeah, sure. I think, yeah, I was just, well, first of all, Akil, I appreciate you expressing that. But I think that like, that's something I thought a lot about. And, you know, I'm like, well, damn, I'm really going to be kind of entering this pretty fucked up system of education. And then I realized, I guess, our just very existence, like in the cities here in the US are kind of like that, right? And so then I thought, okay, well, maybe then if my classroom or I can be like that, like space or that moment, you know, along with others, because, you know, earlier, of course, I was commenting on some people I work with that are very problematic, but I also work with people that are really, that also provide, I think, really great spaces for youth. And so yeah, so I think, you know, so I'm like, okay, well, if youth can kind of have a few of those around the school, then that is something. But yeah, I guess that is one way to navigate it. Yeah, that's kind of what I was wanting to share. But yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to something that Maritza, who was there from DPN, was sharing about, you know, shaming the parents. And it's such a, and, you know, just being fully 100, having been a child and being a parent, so kind of straddled both those worlds. You know, it is the level of viciousness that is there, where it's that if that anything which would be considered a misbehavior of a child, or a child being loud, or just kind of being, you know, just supposedly how, you know, just out of control, or however, it's immediately not in the immediate sense only, but even in the broader social sense and networks, those parents are considered weak. Those parents are labeled as neglecting the child. those parents are then, just even called that, yes, have you seen those children? It's because it's their fault. And of course, and as Nina was lifting patriarchy, that within that patriarchal frame, then it's the mother who gets the most blame, that, because she was unable to train the children. And the language of training is used as if it's, that you program young people and all of that. So I think as we are having these conversations, the complexities, it would also be really nice to spend time and unpack the social and cultural complexities that come with that. And just where you are taught, and this is a very cultural setting. I mean, and I can only speak about South Asian culture. That where on one hand you are told, at least in the Muslim family, that the heaven is beneath your mother's feet. So it's considered that she literally walks on water. In a sense, it's a metaphor, right? But yet at the same time, you're kind of like, what the fuck was this? Then if she is the carries this sacred space, where is this abuse coming from? Right? So why is she being abused like that? But it's the way these and then the father is seen almost as a symbolic figure of God. Like, it's a very godly presence that is almost like, just constantly and so just yeah. So, I mean, having been labeled as being an out of control kid and just like, rebel and various other names, and including, whatever I'm at least speaking from personal experiences, that shit, my mom and dad were more concerned about what people would say rather than, just what's my own relationship with them as well. So, and I'm not going to go into how I've acted as a parent. So stop there.
Yeah, thank you for lifting the thing around shame, because I feel like, kind of thinking of the question around educators and counselors, I think we play a big role about shame, because our narratives about family are very impactful on the students too, even the way we talk to families. And so yeah, I think that is something we have to be mindful of, because if we're not, and you just hear sometimes certain teachers make comments and you're just like, no, you just, no, you don't do that. You don't say that, whether it's demeaning or patronizing or shaming. Yeah. Thank you for lifting that. I think do folks want to go to the last question then? Or does anybody have anything they still want to add to that one?
I just want to say that I feel like the mandated reporting system, I'm just thinking about it, and it's like the narratives about families are like the prime, the like main narratives of dehumanization in so many different contexts. And I'm just thinking about this whole idea about like, there's something like, there's like this narrative that I feel like is used against any kind of colonized population, that they don't care about their kids. And you see it like when people talk about like Palestinians, and there's this whole sort of like this whole myth of the human shields, when it's really that Israel often uses Palestinians as shields themselves, and then like you see it with like the sort of like the stigmatizing of like both the Black mother or the Black father, Black parents in general, as like I like as not this idea of not caring about the kids, and or like the sort of stereotype of the drunk Indian father, like not Indian, like native father, like that kind of that trope of not caring about your kids. And then the other one is the other dehumanizing thing is this idea that you're like you're like a time bomb that's just ready to be violent, you know, at any moment's notice. And I feel like those two tropes are just wielded by this this mandated reporting system. And like what's really ironic is it takes these one moments of like sensationalized violence, oh, it's a school shooting, and which are almost always done by white people, and then it uses that as fuel to then like feed like just tear so many Black families apart, you know what I mean? Like, anyway, sorry Matias, I'm rambling, but yeah.
No, thank you for that, Akil. And yeah, another thing that like your descriptions, your dehumanizing descriptions made me think about was how it is kind of this notion that, you know, well, I'm just thinking about ethnic families or Black families aren't as civilized as white families. And so therefore their disciplining methods or means of showing love and affection and nurturing are somehow lesser than. I just wanted to communicate, my brother's on the Zoom and he's shy, but he messaged me something that I thought was really potent because he's a young person. He said that we should in some capacity ask youth, like ask young people how they would, you know, how they would want to these situations to be handled or, yeah. And I thought that was a really good idea. So I just wanted to voice that. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for lifting that, Matios. Yeah, and wondering then, like, in terms of, hopefully is my audio good? Hopefully y'all can hear me okay. Okay, yeah, so I think then, you know, and this is something I feel like we talk a lot about, but I think it'll help also like close our conversation is just like, yeah, how do we, and I think I really like the way it was worded on here, I had it in my head, but yeah, so how do we build community power during a crisis without relying on policing and surveillance? And, you know, like I said, I think these are things we do discuss, but yeah, maybe just kind of given the conversation we had today, yeah, how can we do that? How can we continue to do that? So we'll close with that question. I know, sorry, I wasn't sure if it was anybody speaking. It had gone, I had completely turned off now.
I have one preliminary thought.
Go ahead.
I think that it's possible, and I just saying I haven't experienced this to like so that I don't know this for sure, but I can imagine that the shame that the parents feel is something that's really isolating. I can imagine that they feel like what's happening is not only their fault, but that they can't go to others about for help about it because they it because of that shame. And I just feel like maybe one part of building that community power is like collective understanding that there's like an enemy and that this enemy is doing something to you, you're being targeted and it's not your fault, or it's like, you know, like yeah, you know, it's not something you have to bear by yourself. And maybe that allows people, maybe like somehow being able to let go of that shame would allow people to connect with others who have either gone through similar things or also don't look upon them with accusation, because they understand this and kind of like can work together with that family.
Yeah, and just echoing what Akil said, I think yeah, I think the shame that comes with it, uh part of it, it's also like because it's we're taught that it's our own failures, right? Like we're sold this idea that like if like there's violence or if something comes up or like poverty, for example, it's our own fault for not being able to like have upward mobility, to be able to navigate that. And so the myth of the American dream, which is it's a nightmare, um, for a lot of folks. I think it's being able to normalize those conversations, and I think part of it is like not only in moments of crisis, but also how are we building that conscious in our daily lives, or in spaces, right? Or planting those seeds, not only when there's like when some shit hits the fan, but how are we building that kind of those tools and that kind of being able to remove the shame from it. And I know like in high school, I think I really appreciated one of my high school teachers because they talked about like even things like having to sleep in the same bedroom as like as several siblings, right? Because you don't really have many spaces, you don't have your own room, and so like being able to like kind of yeah being able to kind of build that into the consciousness, and for teachers it's like it could be really small things of like talking about your own lived experience that sometimes is it leaves a huge impression. And I know that at least personally that's something that helped at least be able to take away that shame and be able to like feel like I could own that. I could speak about it without sometimes, oh, I mean, sometimes I still tremble or sometimes I still shake or my voice still shakes, but um like being able to like start practicing like that it's a reality for a lot of us.
Oh, it's a connect. You're muted, Nadia.
Oh, thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Neat, for lifting. And then I think several folks have lifted that today, just the shame element, because, and this is something like I even with my students, I do share about how with, when we talk about, okay, going up against like the system and systems of oppression, it does seem very daunting, just like so much. I think these reminders of sort of how in just kind of, and I say small, not in a bad way, but just like small things, whether it's not shaming or, just helping somebody out or whatever it is, and even I tell my students, sometimes I just say, hey, like, even just being nice to each other when we know we're in a system where we're kind of pitted against each other, right? Even something as simple as that can be a move towards abolition and can be ways to respond to crises. And so I don't know. So I feel like I really appreciate those reminders. And I know like the students have expressed they do as well, because they're like, oh my God, we're learning about all this stuff. Like where the hell do we even start? And I'm like, just with each other, So yeah, I appreciate kind of those reminders today that folks have given.
Just real quickly, just wanted to read because some of these messages came to me. So Ray G mentioned that please convey my gratefulness to others of this venue and everyone's effort. I have to go now. And then there was another one also from Brother Pancake that just came to me. Let me just look at this. Okay. I may have, I can't find Brother Martinez's comment, so Okay, never mind. Yeah, anyway, so I'm sorry. I don't know what happened to Pancake's message.
What do we say to the Department of Children and Family Services?
Shut it down.
Shut it down!
Oh yeah, I found it. The Pancake said, me being a parent, I support our youth, abolish these systems that play a part in destroying families and communities. I join you in this fight. One love.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Pancake. Always appreciate that. I always personally always appreciate your words and energy, Bing. So thank you so much every time. It's so needed.
Should we close early or do
Yeah.
announcements?
Mhm.
I'll just unmute. Hey folks, Matios, he, him pronouns. So yeah, we were supposed to hear from Ace from Trans Latina Coalition today, but unfortunately they had to dip out. So they asked me to share this report they've been working on, and I'll drop it in the chat here. And they're also working on some legislation to get some resources out to trans elders on the state level. And so they asked that I share that toolkit too. So I'll do that. And hopefully they can join us again real soon. But yeah, that's all I got.
Matios, if you hadn't introduced yourself to us, none of us would know your name.
Oh shit. Just realized I know everybody here.
Make a quick announcement. So next Tuesday, we will have this working group out of public health folks. You know, if folks know Jamie, and they've met Beta and Brianne and some other folks. They are going to be having the next Tuesday is a general meeting, third Tuesday of the month, a webinar with upholding policing, surveillance, and global carcerality, that, you know, the global impact on that. And then they will be discussing public health and how its interpretation and use can vary with social justice implications. They'll also review how to use public health tools to stay safe from long-term impacts of COVID-19. And then introducing the working group that is unpacking public health tools and strategies to uphold white supremacy locally and globally. So now there's going to be a flyer and all, and information going out in the next couple of days. It's given where we are with the ongoing COVID drama that goes on. I think not just that, but also the role of public health in expanding the police state across the globe. So as an integral part of the stalker state. So just wanted to make that announcement. Thank you.
And I just have I know we mentioned it before, but just a friendly reminder that we have our War on Youth working group meeting on, it's typically the same week that we have our War on Youth webinars, which are the second Tuesday of each month. But we're having that tomorrow, I believe from 6 to 8 p.m. But if you're interested, feel free to either drop your email on the chat, or to send us an email at stoplapdspying@gmail.org so we can send you a Zoom link invite.
Nice, thank you. Cool. Well then, I guess we'll see. Pretty much see most of y'all tomorrow, and yeah, and then otherwise next Tuesday as well. Everyone, y'all have a good night. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Uh,
Bye.